Evet, kapı önünde bekleyen, please. Üçüncü oturumda Güven Sak'ın yerine
In the third session, it's a pity that Mr. Güven Sak he had not been able to make it, and on his behalf I will be moderating this session. And on the other hand, I don't know whether is this going to happen in the other sessions or not. I hope it would not happen. Mr. Ulvi Ismail, just like Mr. Güven Sak, he had not been able to make it for this conference. I hope the same thing would not repeat in the other sessions. So we're going to have only two speakers, so we'll be feeling more comfortable in terms of timing, so we will be able to speak in a more comfortable manner. So we will be talking about the sealed border and neighbors, and we would mainly be discussing about the topics of borders being closed, about the concept of sealed border, and the ones who are for and the ones who are against the sealed border between Turkey and Armenia, the representatives of the NGOs, and on the other hand, the consequences of the sealed border between Turkey and Armenia over the Turkish-Georgian border, because when this border is sealed, another border, Turkish-Georgian border, starts to function in a different way. And we will be dwelling upon this aspect of the situation as well. Do excuse me for a minute, I forgot my notes.
İlk konuşmacı Vicken Cheterian.
The first speaker will be Vicken Cheterian. Cheterian, or how do you pronounce it? Cheterian. Vicken Cheterian, he is a journalist, so either Cheterian or Cheterian, both of them works. He is a political analyst, a journalist. He is a He is teaching at the Media and Communication Department of the University of Geneva, and at the same time in London SOAS he is a researcher. He has a researcher, visiting researcher there, and most of you, I believe, would know Samaria Consulting Company. He is also managing the Samaria group, Samaria board, and at the same time in Yerevan there's this Caucasus Media Institute in Yerevan. So in the area of media, in the area of communication, he is an expert specifically on these topics. And Vicken Cheterian will be presenting you the topic on the Turkish political options, Turkish political choices, and shaping the Karabakh conflict. If Mr. Ulvi Ismail had been here, probably he would have been covering these areas as well. So these two speakers will be covering these topics. Yes, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Ahmet. Good evening. Thank you for your being here, and I would like also to thank Hrant Dink Foundation and the committee which selected my presentation. It's an honor being here. The topic of my paper is Turkish political choices and the shaping of the Karabakh conflict. what I'm trying to do here is to think whether political choices that were taken and political choices that were not taken, what kind of influence they had in the events between Armenians and Azerbaijanis between 1988 up to today. And what I will try to do is both to go through deliberate choices taken by Turkey, like the border is a very good example, what to do with the border, to open it, to close it, why, in what conditions. But there's an underlying deeper kind of communication and deeper meaning of Turkey's political choices going back to the events that took place during First World War and how Turkey positioned itself afterwards. So I will work on these two levels. But first, let me bring you an image. I will go back to something that was mentioned earlier. I will go to Dizernagapert, which is in Yerevan. It's on a hill. It's the monument dedicated to the victims of the genocide. And the time is the month of April 24, 1992. I was there. I was walking with many people carrying flowers, going to the monument. But what struck me was just 100 meters before one reaches the monument, there were 4 new tombstones of young men who were killed fighting. In fact, they were fighting on the border with Nakhichevan. So the fact that those 4 young dead men were buried on this site, for me it was annoying. It was annoying because at the time it was communicating something. It was not by chance that they were there. And what was the message from this communication was that we are fighting now the same fight as 1915. And me, at that time, I very much opposed such a reading of the events. Me, I thought history is not necessary to repeat itself, that Azerbaijan is not Ottoman Empire, that Azerbaijani people are not the people of the other side of the border, that Azerbaijani leadership are not the Ittihadists, and that we should understand what was happening in Karabakh from a very different context, from the context of the Soviet Union, Soviet legacy, problems that emerged in the conditions of Soviet disintegration and very rapid collapse. And eventually, what was happening in Karabakh was not unique. There were a number of similar conflicts taking place. Karabakh was only one. For example, in neighboring Georgia, there was South Ossetia, which also was in conflict with central authorities. There was Abkhazia. A bit further to the north, there was the conflict between the Ingush and the Osset, and then the bigger, very tragic conflict in Chechnya. There's the Transnistrian conflict in Moldova. There was Tajikistan in civil war. So the ethnic clashes in southern Kyrgyzstan, Fergana Valley between Uzbeks and Kyrgyz, and so on. So me, I very kind of strongly opposed at the time to superpose the past with the present, because I was also hoping that the future would be different from the past, that although there are political divergences, difficulties, that people will not necessarily find solutions in violence. Now, in case someone asked me today, was I right? I would probably say that I was wrong, that my hopes were not very correct at the time, and that there's stronger continuity between the past and the present than I hoped at the time, or at the time I thought I was analyzing, so it was more pretentious. And more interesting, my observation today is that the past 1915 genocide is not being linked to the present by the Armenians, which one would suppose, right? But by, surprisingly, Azerbaijan. And I will come back to that. So the Karabakh conflict was initially a political issue. In February 20, 1988, the local Soviet of Karabakh voted to bring Karabakh to be part of Soviet Armenia at the time. And just 1 week later, there's a violence, very major violence erupting over 2.5 days, 3 days in Sumgait, far away from Karabakh, where anti-Armenian pogroms are taking place. So in a very short period of time, we moved from a conflict which was in its nature political, and it could have stayed political. Because in the Caucasus in the next few years, we had over 30, up to 35 territorial divergences, and only 5 violent conflicts. So it was not necessary that an issue which is of political nature immediately comes into violence. But the very rapid violence that took place later already changed the nature of the struggle. And what happened in Sumgait, for me, it's a kind of communication, it's a kind of reminder, it's a kind of a message and a communication between two sides, where in the past there has been similar violence regulating the relations, and when once again we have times of trouble, times of uncertainty, times of political negotiations to determine the new regimes that are emerging, this reminder is coming back, saying, in case you ask more than what you deserve, your fate will be like in the past. So the violence exercised is not simply taking place in the content of the current relations, but the memory of violence remains in communities, on both sides of communities, and it re-emerges in a very strong way when there are times of uncertainty which generate fear and anxiety. So then we have a series of anti-Armenian pogroms in different Azerbaijani towns. We have violence exercised by Armenians against Azerbaijanis in Armenia, forcing 160,000 of them to leave their houses, their homes, their land, and go to Azerbaijan, and so on. So there's the language of violence predominating. Now I want to leave this for the moment and come back to Turkey. Turkey in these years was on the level of high leadership discussing from time to time what to do with the Armenian case, both with Armenian diaspora and later on when there was the Karabakh movement and independence of Armenia, what to do with Armenia. But Turkey at the time is very different from Turkey today. At the time, we had not seen independent Armenian voices talking about who we are in Turkey. At the time, the image of the Armenians, after being forgotten and erased from memory for many decades, re-emerged with the terrorist attacks of Armenian groups. So this was a period from 75 to 85, where Turkey, both as public opinion as well as leadership, had to confront with this sudden kind of surprise that there are militant, activists, terrorists attacking us because of something which initially we didn't know what it was, because we had forgotten about the Armenians. And then when this movement dies down, basically it destroys itself, that's what happened, there's a second violent group emerging, PKK, where again in the imagination of the Turkish, both public and the elite, is associated with Armenians, because we tried to find hidden Armenians in PKK to associate this with this image of the other being by excellence Armenians. So there's this very definite mood in Turkey at the time, which is even more exacerbated with the collapse of socialism in Eastern Europe and in the Soviet Union, and with the emergence of ethnic violence, which is not only ethnic, it's also confessional. It's also Muslim Christian in certain cases, like in Bosnia. ethnic and confessional identities overlap certain times. And then there's the emergence of conflicts in the Caucasus, which brings back also very negative memories, strong anxieties to the Turkish public, also issues which have not been worked and confronted, this anxiety of the past and what happened to these communities, knowing that Turkey has large segments of its population, including its elites, being of muhajirs origins, both from the Balkans and the Caucasus. So when the Karabakh conflict emerges in late 80s, early 90s, there's already a certain emotional kind of predisposition in Turkey. And even before Karabakh gets very much into total war, and Armenian forces go out of the limits of Karabakh and occupy territories around Karabakh, first being Lachin and the second being Kelbajar. Even before that, Turkey has very kind of at least suspicious position towards Armenia. Although Turkey is the first state which recognized independence of Armenia, but it didn't establish, for example, in late 91, early 92, during 92, Turkey could have established diplomatic relations with Armenia, could have opened border and so on, but it didn't do that. And the issue is Karabakh, but more than Karabakh. I think Karabakh is only added later. Turkey also had issues with Armenia, being that Armenia should recognize the Kars Treaty, the actual border, the fact that Armenia would not raise issues related with the genocide recognition and so on. Okay. So all these determined certain policies led to certain policies in Turkey. And I would say that Turkey became part of the conflict. First, during the conflict, Turkey gave military aid to Azerbaijan. There were a number of former generals, officers who were on the Azerbaijani side, arms going there, and then later the blockade. So, and politically, Turkey adopted also a position which supports Azerbaijani perspective that the solution of the conflict should be according to what Azerbaijan was saying. Now, I want to come to the second part, which is Azerbaijan taking over the discourse of genocide and making it its own. And I want to mention just two symbolic moments. One is in March 1998 with a official decree from the president of Azerbaijan announcing the day of genocide of Azerbaijanis. And the document is on the internet. You can go and visit and have a look. It's not a historical kind of specific event. It mentions all the ills that modern Azerbaijan imagines it suffered. It starts with Turkmen-Chai agreement, for example, where there's no Armenia and no Azerbaijan. It's between Tsarist and Safavid empires, but this is mentioned as the starting point, and from there on, series of historical events, more or less, which is attributed as bad behavior from Azerbaijan wanting to destroy, from Armenian side, wanting to destroy Azerbaijan and its people. So there's this kind of parallelism between Armenian identity and specifically how Azerbaijan imagines Armenians to be and imagines the strong point of the Armenians. Because the other point is that the state of Azerbaijan actively tries to support structures abroad to create an Azerbaijani diaspora, thinking that the two strong points of Armenians is genocide on the one hand and diaspora on the other. So Azerbaijan wants to have something similar to that. And on the genocide side, apart from this decree, there's the day of Khojali massacre, which is commemorated every day and put forward as the day of genocide. Now, the other point is the events after 2008-2009, which landed in the Zurich protocols. And I would say that this this event shows that there was a feeling of failure on the side of Turkish officials, that the policies that they led didn't give results, and it was time to revise. And whatever the details one puts forward, there are different versions of it, we know that these protocols failed. They didn't give results. Now it's been 5 years and we didn't achieve any results. So not only Turkey in 2008 recognized that its policy of not talking to Armenia and blockading the borders didn't produce any positive results because the conflict is still there. We didn't find any solution. But also the attempt to change this policy has failed. So I would say that today, unfortunately, Turkey has brought its South Caucasus policies to become hostage of the will of the rulers of Azerbaijan, and I think on the long term it doesn't help neither Turkey nor Azerbaijan nor Armenia. I say this because we know that the front line between the two sides is very violent. There are exchanges of fire and victims regularly. So the risk of a future war is there. And in case Turkey doesn't have the courage to say that my choice in the South Caucasus, and specifically in this conflict, is peace, then Turkey will be part of those forces that could contribute for an eventual conflict. And we know that in our region there are too many conflicts, and I think we can today build policies and take steps that can stop such a danger instead of agitating to it. Now, one final remark as a conclusion. It's very curious to compare Turkey's eastern borders with southern borders. In the southern borders of Turkey, in Iraq, in Syria, we see that borders are falling apart. Borders are disappearing. Borders are becoming porous, and borders are becoming irrelevant. These are also former Ottoman lands, so it's also Turkey's immediate neighbor. While on the eastern side of Turkey we have this small piece of the last wall left from the Cold War, and this is an aberration. And I think we need some courage altogether to put into question those policies of the last 20 years which brought to this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for our 20 minutes spiel. Now it's şimdi
We will move on with the second presentation by Vahram Matevosyan on decoding Turkey-Georgian strategic partnership and its implications for Armenia and beyond. He is in the National Academy of Sciences, Republic of Armenia, Institute of Oriental Studies. He is a senior researcher in the National Academy of Sciences, and previously in the National Strategic Research Center he served as the vice president and under the Ministry of Defense. I don't know how to interpret the Strategic Research Institute, let's say. He chaired this institute and he is specialized on strategy in Rum University and Belgium University, and following this in Yerevan University. He completed his studies and he obtained his doctoral degree in history. And ideological transformation in Turkey, Islamic movements in Turkey, and Turkey-Armenia relations are some fields of activity and work for him. You have 20 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon. The Hrant Foundation has spoiled us with books, and we have so many books, and I didn't come empty-handed. I want to present the book which was published only 2 days ago. It's first time ever in Armenia the history of Turkish Republic was published, and I'm glad that I'm the first person who is bringing this book to Turkey. This book and my book, which was published in 2008, which is Islam in Turkish Politics. It's basically about Milli Görüş movement, and this book was published in 2008, and I dedicate it to the memory of Hrant Dink, whom I met in 2004 and 2005, and his influence on me was huge, and many ideas that were shaped concerning Turkey were shaped thanks to this very wise man. So I give these two books to Hrant Dink Foundation, and I give these two books to the newly emerging research center that Cengiz Aktar announced at the very beginning.
Thank you.
Thank you. As you can see, the title of my presentation is somehow related to the border, to the relations which are only remotely associated with Armenia, Turkish-Armenian relations, but this is only from first instance. In reality, there are many interesting developments happening now in Georgia, and my aim today is to present major paradigms of these developments, and also to present what are the challenges ahead for Armenia, having in the view increasing influence of Turkey in Georgia. Since 2004, Georgian-Turkish relations have been improving visibly. And in 2007, Georgia and Turkey signed the free trade agreement, and it was put in force rather quickly, and it became an instigator for drastic changes in Turkey, in Georgia. Turkish foreign direct investments in Georgia also increased significantly. From 1997 to 2003, the investment volume was only 103 million. From 2004, the investments basically skyrocketed. In 1999, 10 Turkish entrepreneurs established organization named GÜRTİAD, Gürcü ve Türk İş Adamları Derneği, Association of Georgian and Turkish Businessmen, which later on, earlier this year, they already had 66 members on the executive board. More visible to the population were the construction of Tbilisi and Batumi airports by TAV Urban, Georgia, of TAV Group. And moreover, these two airports are under Turkish company management for a long period of time. Two Turkish commercial banks, Türkiye Cumhuriyeti Ziraat Bankası ve Türkiye İş Bankası, these two banks operate in Georgia, in Tbilisi and Batumi. Moreover, after the cancellation of visa-free regime, Georgia labor market started to explore Turkey, and Turkey became the number 5 destination for labor migrants from Georgia. But all with these all mentioned figures, some Georgian scholars still think that the Turkish great capital never came to Georgia, and I quote here from one of the respected analysts in Georgia. With the passage of time, in some circles of Georgia, people started to become concerned with increasing increasing Turkish presence, and I met with the leader of the Free Georgia Party, Hakukava, and I quote him, he said the following: "We certainly welcome the investments, but there are a lot of cases when the Turkish entrepreneurs' behavior is obscure. For example, people selling shawarma in Batumi and Tbilisi, central avenues and highways, put Turkey's flag next to it. Their motivation is incomprehensible." He also added that his party perceived Turkey as a threat to Georgia's national interests, but also explained that he was against extreme measures and was of the opinion that Turkey's expansion to Georgia must be prevented by diplomatic means. So parallel to economic presence of Turkey in Georgia, we also observe a number of institutions which are under the auspices of the Turkish Prime Ministry, mainly the Turkish Cooperation Economic Agency, famously known as TİKA, Yunus Emre Turkish Cultural Centers, and the Presidency of Religious Affairs, also famously known as Diyanet, being very famous in Georgia and expanding their activities in Georgia. In addition to these institutions, there are also schools belonging to Fethullah Gülen movement, which are operating under the auspices of Çağlar Education Institution. Currently, there are 7 Gülen schools in Georgia, 1 university, and another interesting example, the Turkish Embassy in Georgia is carrying out a course especially for bureaucrats in Georgia, which is called Atatürk Lessons in Leadership. And various bureaucrats in the Georgian government, they get together. People from Turkey go there and give lessons, and especially one lecture headlined Atatürk's role in establishing the new state. And also, by the way, this project was not listed in the embassy's website. Okay, with all these mentioned, I want to now turn to the opportunities, and I want to talk briefly about the Kars-Akhalkalaki railway project. Now, this project, which was initiated in 2007, Armenia was very critical at the very beginning to this project, and it was understandable because in 2006 and 2007, Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan and Baku-Tbilisi-Erzurum pipelines became operational, and a new railway was yet another indication that Armenia felt that it is going to be more isolated. And Armenia opposed it vehemently. And with the passage of time, however, it became obvious that this railway 100-kilometer long railway is going to be finished, and it was postponed a number of times, and it seems by the end of next year it's going to be completed. And so each time Armenia was hopeful that Turkish government will backtrack, especially during the 2008-2010 when there was a football diplomacy, so-called. However, the project slowly moved on, and now it could be stated that even if Kars-Gyumri railway is opened, it's not going to be in competition with this Kars-Akhalkalaki railway, because Kars-Akhalkalaki railway is constructed using the advanced technological solutions, and whereas the Kars-Gyumri line is worn out and outdated like the most of the Armenian railway network. Thus, what are the policy choices for Armenia, having in the view that the Turkish-Armenia border remains closed and there is no prospects for it to be opened? Firstly, I think the Armenian government should seek opportunity rather than challenge in this project. The big question that stands in front of the Armenian government is how to take advantage of this project, how to benefit from something that it resisted some years ago. Therefore, a few factors and justifications need to be considered. The Akhalkalaki terminal, which will serve as a major hub in the region, is only 30 kilometers away from the Armenian border. It is also 90 kilometers away from Gyumri, from Armenia's second largest city. It is also 210 kilometers away from Yerevan. Armenian government started this high-speed highway project, which will connect the southernmost city of Armenia, Mehri, to the northernmost city of Pavra, which is on the Georgian border. And with that highway, it will only take 2 hours from Yerevan to get to Akhalkalaki. With this, the road to Batumi and Poti ports will decrease 3 times if Armenia gets access to the Akhalkalaki railway station. If Armenia also manages to get access to the Akhalkalaki terminal, the negative economic implications of the closed Turkish-Armenian border will also decrease. The 21-year-old Turkish blockade of Armenia has seriously damaged the Armenian economy. And according to different calculations, if the border was open, the Armenia's GDP could have been at least doubled by this time. Of course, for the Armenian economy, the Kars-Akhalkalaki railway can in no way replace Kars-Gyumri railway, but it will significantly reduce the burden of transportation costs. Obviously, we will hear an opposition from Azerbaijan, and there is a huge likelihood of that. And I guess one thing that Azerbaijan's government should understand, and the international community also, that this project was not built to isolate Armenia. It was built for the economic benefits to transport Caspian energy and goods to Turkey and to Europe. So that's the first thing. So the Azerbaijani government should understand that this is that it wasn't the primary aim of this project. The other country in this equilibrium is, of course, Turkey. The Turkish government position towards Armenia's participation is also going to be an important one. And Armenia has Armenian economy has still survived, but with this possibility, it can develop even further. Of course, and the Georgian position is going to be much more critical, because the Georgian government, especially the new government, the Georgian Dream coalition government, hasn't been quite in favor of this railway project, quoting some conditions that they don't like. And now I guess it's a appropriate moment for Georgian government to work with Armenian government, or vice versa, to find out some solutions that Armenia could be on board of this project. However, it's going to be very difficult to observe how the Georgian government is going to oppose Turkish and Azerbaijani influences in Georgia, because they are key players in the Georgian economy, and also in some regions like in Nigeria. Turkey is also a key player, and the soft power of Turkey in Georgia is something that is also raising questions among many circles. I'll stop it here, and I'll be glad to take any questions. Thank you.
Evet, başta da söylediğim gibi,
as I said at the beginning, linked to the Karabakh problem on the side of Azerbaijan, opening up of the border between Turkey and Armenia, there are some circles supporting this and opposing to this idea, which was normally to be presented by the third speaker, who is absent. So one pillar is missing, but maybe thanks to the questions that will come now, we will be maybe filling in his position. We have 20 minutes for questions. We will be inviting the questions now. Let's take a couple of questions and then answer them. I will take up what was suggested by Neşe Özgen, the previous moderator. Please identify yourself and mention who your addressee is. Yes, please.
Lale Yalçın-Ekman, Vicken, I have a question to you. It was very moving to hear your sort of memory of 1992, and I'm terribly sad that you changed your mind. It reminded me very much the way I have been talking to friends in Baku. One of them had been to visit the genocide memorial, I think sometime in 70s. She must have been there as a guest. She was friends with Armenian colleagues. And she told me how she was stunned when her Armenian friend told her, well, this is all, you know, what the Turks have done to us. And then looking at her, and she said, but I'm not a Turk. I mean, this reminded me very much of the way the complicated history has been sort of changing at the same time. Probably she would also think like you, saying, well, maybe there was more historical continuity, which is sad, which I find very sad. But then at the end you said, you called everybody to be courageous. You said this is the last sort of, you know, closed border of the Cold War. And I would like to ask you, what would you think would be a courageous step in Armenia to open this border?
Does it work? Okay. I'm Milena Abrahamian. My question is for Vicken Cheterian. I think that it is commonly believed that the reason that Turkey closed its border with Armenia has very much a lot to do with Karabakh. But I'm wondering about the implication of Kurds living right directly across the border from Armenia in the Turkish part. And what are the implications of that, and how can we problematize this assumption that it is really Karabakh? I mean, for sure there's an aspect of this, but what about the fact that there are Kurdish people living on the other side of the border? And also, one more question, I guess they're connected in some way also. I think that many Azerbaijanis perhaps might think that Turkey did not do enough in alliance and supporting with this war, and I think to add to this, there's also this. There are also many stereotypes between Turkish and Azerbaijani people, among each other. So how can we deal with this? How can we bring this into the discussion?
My question is to Vahram. In your presentation you mentioned the Gulen movement and how active they are in Georgia, and as we all know, the Gulen movement has been very effective in sort of blazing the trail on behalf of the government in countries where we haven't had relations, such as in northern Iraq, for instance, which isn't quite a country yet, but the Gulen movement was very active there even before the government arrived, and almost acted as the head of the movement there almost acted as a de facto consul general. We're also aware that the Gulen movement has been making some efforts to develop ties with Armenia. And I was wondering whether you think they can be an effective agent for promoting relations between Turkey and Armenia, and whether, conversely, you believe that the Armenian Church can have a role.
My name is Sezai Yazıcı. I have a question to Mr. Cheterian. You explained the process so well, and in your presentation you said the independence was recognized, but then Turkey could have done something. What could Turkey have done? And in the morning, Liberidian explained certain things about this, and he has a book about the statehood of Armenia in Turkey. I think it was translated as well. And this process provides all the details about this in the book, and he confirmed it in the morning. So independence was recognized on one hand, on the other hand, about the transfer of wheat, an effort was made. So what is in your mind, Mr. Cheterian, until 1993? What could have Turkey done about this? Thank you.
Very interesting questions, which helps me elaborate further my points, what I was trying to do. I thought Karabakh was, part of this huge earthquake, which was the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I think that we overemphasize the importance of nationalism in the conflicts. I think when we look at the Soviet history, the way the central authorities had concentrated so much power in their hands and did not let local mechanisms of issues to be solved, conflict resolution and so on, and then this center rapidly disintegrates, it creates conditions for conflict. But then the memories come back. And I think the different actors could not overcome that part. And that's why when we look at the conflicts in the Caucasus, we see that violent conflicts took place when there's this kind of past issues, huge traumas that were never rightly addressed and corrected and said that, yes, what happened in the past was a crime. Because when you recognize a crime as a crime, then you are taking already steps towards stopping it. When you don't do that, then it becomes a legitimate instrument for political negotiations, discussions, exchange. And this is what happened. So what I'm trying to ask is, in case Turkey had been going through its democratization process early on, let's say in the 60s, 70s, 20s, I don't know, and had confronted its past with its minorities, including the Armenians, could we have avoided Karabakh war the way it happened? I think it's a legitimate question to ask. So it's not basically me who has changed my mind. I still think that those conflicts could have been addressed without violence. But history shows that that chance was not taken. That road was not taken, not by me, but by the actors. Now, to come to your question, I think Armenia can do a lot because Armenia has moved away from its sense of victimhood after the Karabakh War. During the Karabakh War, it had that sense of victimhood. That's why I brought the example of those 4 fallen fighters being buried at Zernagaperd. But I should also say that Armenia stopped doing that. Later on, they had another war cemetery, Yeraplur, where the rest of the fighters who died in combat are placed there. So they dissociated this symbolic continuity between the past and present. And instead we see that now Azerbaijan kind of adopted, I would even dare to say plagiarized, this kind of communication on victimhood, borrowing from what it considers the history of the other. Anyway, that's a long issue, and there's this Turkish sociologist who has worked a lot about this, amazing work, Ceylan Tokluoğlu. She has 2-3 articles, incredible. She has done in-depth interviews with Azerbaijani leadership, and she shows this mechanism of borrowing from the other. Now, coming to Armenians, I think Armenian leadership, political elite, as well as civil society, public opinion, has not done enough to understand that Armenia also needs to be active to find solution to the conflict. The public opinion in Armenia has forgotten about this conflict and wakes up when there's violence. And I think this is not the way to go forward. And especially, I think what lacks in Armenia is that no one in Armenia tries to dialogue with Azerbaijani public opinion on a symbolic level, on the level of representation. Okay, there are NGOs who meet from time to time, but what is needed is to understand the evolution taking place in Azerbaijani public opinion, partially under the influence of very heavy state propaganda, but not only. There's a real issue there which is not being addressed. And I think at certain political moments, some symbolic steps from the side of the Armenians could have facilitated finding a solution, and we missed the occasion at different places. Key West is one, the protocols is the other, and each time I raise this issue in Armenia, the answer I get is that no, we can't be seen as weak, because in case we make gestures, the interpretation from the side of Azerbaijan will be that we are weak, and then they will ask more without finding a compromise. So this is the answer, which for me is not satisfactory. Now I want to come to the second question, what Turkey could have done. I think Turkey adopted an ideological position on the Karabakh conflict and on the Armenian issue in general, back in late 1980s and early 1990s. And since then it has become a hostage of its choices. I will give you another example to illustrate. The Islamic Republic of Iran. We consider this state to be an ideological state, right? But look at its policies in the Caucasus and in Central Asia. And I will not bring Iranian policies in Karabakh conflict, I will bring Iranian policies in Tajikistan. In Tajikistan in 1992 there was a huge, very violent, bloody civil war. This war was done between mainly Islamic opposition, Islamic Revival Party of Tajikistan, and old nomenclatura communist rulers. Iran adopted very pragmatic position from the Tajikistan conflict, and Iran facilitated between the two sides, and when there was a peace agreement signed, it was signed in Tehran, not in Moscow, December 1997. So this illustrates that Turkey also had choices to make, and Turkey made certain choices. And I think they were the wrong choices. And I think the 2008 kind of football diplomacy shows that even Turkey recognizes, that this policy that we made for the last 15 years were not the best. Maybe let's look for another solution, and they unfortunately failed. Now, concerning the Kurdish element in Ankara-Yerevan relations, I think this issue came very strongly in '94, but I think it's not at the essence of deciding the relationship. In '94, there was a very strong kind of accusations coming from Turkey, I remember at the time, saying that PKK has bases in Armenia and so on, which were not the case. They were no bases. There were some kind of facilitation for wounded people to come to Armenia, but not more. Like there was not training bases or something like that. But anyway, there was this very strong pressure coming from Ankara on PKK issue. But I think policies were already kind of decided early on. And I would say the first cornerstone to understand is Turkish mental universe towards Armenian issues, which was inherited from this two generation of violence. First the Armenian terrorist violence and then PKK violence, which was amalgamated, was not understood in Turkey, and it was put in one bag. Sometimes out of not understanding, sometimes out of also propaganda purposes. And initially what Turkey wanted from Armenia is to say, we have no historical issue. You will put on paper that we have no historical issue, and you will say that Kars Treaty is the one deciding the borders and so on. Now, at that time, in Yerevan, there was a group in power which were looking for solutions, positive solutions with Turkey. Because don't forget that the Armenian national movement that emerged was, in its essence, anti-Soviet. It was even revising Armenian political history and this trauma from Turkey, saying that we should have pragmatic relations with Turkey. And they were ready for that because they were looking for solutions from being under pressure from Moscow. But then the Karabakh conflict on the one side, and then Turkey taking 100% pro-Azeri position, left no choice in front of Armenia than to go to Moscow and say, Tavarishi, what is the demand? Where's the paper? I want to come back. And these policies go on until today. And from time to time I hear from Azerbaijani leaders that Armenians are instruments of Moscow. Yes, fine, okay, right. But what do you do so that Armenians stop being instruments of Moscow? Do you do anything? And no. So this pressure from Azerbaijan on the one side and Turkey from the other side leaves no choice to Armenia than to agree to Russian military bases, Russian economic influence, Russian political influence, and so on. Thank you. Thank you.
Amberin, Gulen movement, whether they can do anything in Armenia. Well, I guess they did try in 2007 and 6 to do something. They did approach to a number of institutions in Armenia trying to open up not schools, but at least cultural centers. They were rejected, and especially they wanted to renovate a few cultural institutions in Armenia, especially being part of the National Academy of Sciences, but that didn't quite work out. And now, if they come up with any solutions, they will be seen suspiciously by the Armenian government. Even more than that, I want to say that those Gulen movement-associated academicians in America, they are the ones who are taking very anti-Armenian positions on many issues. And one of the names that comes to anyone's mind is how Hakan Yavuz is doing and what he's doing. He's playing these double games with trying to organize conferences and trying to write books on Fethullah Gulen, at the same time trying to distance himself from this movement and stuff like that. So and now if they come on the project, I don't think the answer will be positive now. So as it comes to the Armenian church, the short answer is no. I don't think there is any perspective the Armenian church to play any role, for simple reason, because the Armenians, first and foremost, their status in Turkey should be changed. The Armenian Patriarchate of Istanbul, they are still having this the status which is not quite a status, and the interference of the Turkish government on the Armenian Patriarchate is visible and vivid and bold, and it creates problems of trust between Armenian Apostolic Church and the Turkish government and Armenian Patriarchate of Istanbul. On the other hand, there of course are possibilities, and the renovation of Armenian churches in Turkey could be one of these prospects that can create opportunities for the Armenian church to come up and try to create a different platform of cooperation. As now, some people in Armenia are a very marginal group, but they are saying that we don't want the Armenian churches to be renovated. I don't see any logic behind it, because any stone which is preserved, that's a major blessing, and anything that is being done for the preservation of single church, it doesn't matter who is implementing it. Not only the Turkish government is carrying out this renovation, but also Armenian communities in diaspora. They're organizing themselves locally or externally, and they're coming and through fundraising, they're rebuilding these churches. I heard also, like last week, that the Turkish government is considering to give funds for the renovation of some of the Ani churches in Ani, which is wonderful news. If that comes into implementation, that's going to be wonderful news. Thank you.
Thank you. Two comments, questions. One is that I think that those of us who live daily this business of no relations between Armenia and Turkey take many things for granted. Both Libaridian and Vicken alluded to it. The question was, what does that mean, that they recognized and didn't do more? And you both went into the actual depths of the political and ideological issues and didn't explain the basics. Recognizing is one thing. Signing diplomatic relations so that these two countries can talk to each other is another thing. Armenia and Turkey have never done that. Turkey did not embark on that process of establishing diplomatic relations, which means many things. A, it means you don't have two government reps who can talk to each other. Very simple. One doesn't have an embassy, the other doesn't have an embassy. You have to talk through fourth parties, maybe, maybe not, and all of the advantages that embassies give you. Number two, if an organization from Armenia wanted to be in Turkey, or an organization from Turkey wanted to be in Armenia, there are absolutely no mechanisms that make that possible. Bank accounts, visas, none of that. So that next step that would have been a normal step for normal relations was never taken. And I just wanted to add that because I really think many people don't realize the depth of this disconnect. You know, I was laughing at James Derunyan, poor guy, about the Afghanistan parallel. I said, are you kidding? You know, anyway, that's one. The other one, it really is a question, and you alluded to it at the end. That is, where is it that those of us who truly believe that if Turkey were to take a different position, perhaps not the ideal one that lots of us want, but anywhere in between the present one and that one, how is it that we are not able to explain why that would have fundamental geopolitical, strategic, regional peace dividends? I mean, you went down that road, but it seems to me we keep leaving things out of that explanation. How do we begin to explain that? The psychological, the memory, all of it. Thank you.
Quite sure. I'm not quite sure how to frame this, but it bothers me in relation to I'm not sure how to frame this question, but it bothers me in relation to Turkey's linkage of the Karabakh conflict to Armenian occupation. But in the same way, Turkey surely is occupying northern Cyprus. So it seems like a sort of a zero sum, that both are undertaking actions which are at best questionable. They both relate to entities which are not acknowledged or accepted diplomatically by a majority of the world.
Salpia, it's very difficult. I don't know where to start. You know, it's huge, and it's
bundan sonraki
Let me remind you that in the preceding session, which is 5:15, both Thomas Duval and Tuana Hill, especially Thomas Duval, Karabakh, are we closer from war to peace? So in the next session, the same topic will continue to be discussed.
No, it's huge, and what I'm trying to say is that especially now in this whole region, when you look at the map, north in Ukraine there is war, which we really succeeded in avoiding it in the early 90s, and now we fall back into that. In the south there's Syria and Iraq and further, which is really human disaster. And what we need from our leaders is to tell us that sometimes positive things also can come from politics. And for that, we need some courage. And here we can do something. Here we can do something. Because the whole content of politics, whether it's nationalist politics, it's Western politics, it's Islamic politics, it all went to horrors. And now, really, we need some content which shows that things can start from hell and move forward to something positive. And we are not there yet. So we don't have that kind of leaders who can who have the courage. Now, concerning Karabakh and Northern Cyprus, one should be a diplomat and live in a diplomatic world to make parallels and say, in that case you behaved like this, in this case you didn't behave like that. So there are laws and regulations, but in the real world of politics, rules apply to the little ones, to the weak ones, and strong states don't need rules so that they follow them. So yeah, Turkey is a big country. It can occupy northern Cyprus and then oppose occupation of Karabakh. So no problem in that. Just like Russia, USA, and whatnot. So we should find political solutions in each case. And Cyprus is a difficult one. Karabakh is even more difficult.
Some question?
No, I just concerning the last question, I guess that parallel could be drawn if someone doesn't know specifics of the conflict. Only from the surface they look different, but once you make even one step forward, like a plethora of differences will just emerge and pop up, and there is no way these conflicts could even be compared. So, I don't think there is any legitimate claim behind that comparison. Thank you.
Peki, teşekkür ederiz. Saat 5 çeyrek geç.
Thank you very much. 5:15 p.m. We will be convening in the very same room to discuss the sealed borders, and Soli Özel will be chairing the session. Thank you very much.